Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for our Water Towers of the West Climate Action Sunday webinar today with Kate Hale from CU's Geography Department. My name is Michelle Whitty. I am the Nature Education Director for Wild Bear Nature Center, which is the host of this awesome event this afternoon. Wild Bear is right in Nederland. If you haven't been into our interim nature center in town yet, it's right by the BNF and Carousel of Happiness. Super cool. We're changing exhibits all the time. It's free, open up almost every single day of the year. Really great snowshoe rentals and other things going on this time of year. Lots of events as well. I'll put a link to our calendar of events in the chat here in a little bit. And I'm excited to welcome Kate. She's going to be discussing some of her research as it applies to snowpack and other implications out here in the Rocky Mountains, as well as the entire west of the United States, and how that impacts our water resources, recreational opportunities, and she's the expert, so I'll let her get into that in just a moment. But I first want to recognize that if you're in Boulder County tuning in, for most places in Colorado, you are on native land right now of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples. And I just think that's important for us to acknowledge during these types of events. So if you have any questions about wild bear or anything else, please just put them in the chat, which is also just a great place to put questions or thoughts you might have during today's webinar with Kate. Me and her will make sure that at some point during the presentation, she'll be able to answer those questions or respond to your thoughts. We'll have plenty of time at the end. And in case this is one of your first Zoom webinar formats, Kate and I cannot see or hear you. So our main way of communicating with all of you is through our chat. And so we look forward to getting to know you all a little bit through there and answering any of your questions through that. So without any further ado, I'll mute myself and I'll pass it over to Kate. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Michelle. Can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me, Michelle? Yes, great. Okay, unless I hear otherwise, I'm gonna assume that everyone can hear me and see my title slide that is up on the screen. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. Again, my name is Kate Hale. I'm a PhD candidate at CU-Boulder in the Geography Department and part of the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. I study snow science, which is part of the motivation behind this talk. And some parts of this talk also stem from my own personal interests and from my passion to understand particularly the natural world sitting right out here in our backyard. So this presentation intertwines some professional and some personal endeavors. So be prepared for some of my own personal photos. The presentation is intended to provide a more kind of general overarching understanding of snow, particularly as Michelle mentioned, here in Colorado, but also across Western North America and a bit globally as well. So some of the topics that I'll touch on that are kind of intertwined with snow science and snow hydrology, I'm not a super expert on, but I will try my best to answer any and all questions that you may have. And then again, to echo Michelle, I acknowledge that today's presentation is virtual and that kind of changes some of the format. I'm typically quite open to pausing and answering questions that are specific to what I'm talking about in the moment. We can also kind of come back to different slides. So feel free to drop any questions or comments in the chat as we move through. I have the chat pulled up. I'll be managing a couple different screens, so if I don't get to your question in the moment, we'll come back to it afterward for sure. The other point I want to mention is, as folks were logging on, Michelle kind of asked for folks to drop in the chat if you're comfortable with where you're coming from. I know Wild Bear is up in Nederland, Colorado, so I'm not sure if everyone is tuning in from Nederland. I am personally coming from 4 Mile Canyon, just outside of Boulder, between Boulder and Nederland. So yeah, drop anything about yourself in the chat just so I can know who I'm talking to. But with that, let's hop into today's presentation. So I am going to be talking about the water towers of the West. And when I say that, you might ask, or I might ask, what am I talking about? So I'm talking about the mountains here in Colorado and across Western North America, which are natural formations. They often serve as a playground, as folks were logging on. Some were sharing what you like to do in the snow and in that may be up in the mountains where you can splitboard, you can ski, cross-country ski, snowshoe, etc. For me, the mountains are a way to test myself physically and mentally, and they're a place to observe and explore the natural processes that occur across the greater landscape. It's a place for me to connect with others. I have a photo here of, it's kind of an older photo, but of my lab group up in the Indian Peaks wilderness area. So they hold a lot of meaning, I think, for a lot of us who are tuning in today. And they also hold a lot of water. So when I'm talking about natural water towers, I'm talking about mountains that store water as snow. And that's going to be the focus of our talk and discussion this afternoon. So let's kind of zoom into our little section of Colorado, where, so I have a map here, and I'm showing Boulder, Colorado. This is, I could also drop a pin here. If you can follow my cursor, right, this is the town of Nederland and the Barker Reservoir. So what we can see in kind of this zoomed out photo, I mentioned Barker Reservoir. If you move kind of down toward Boulder or across the landscape, you can see the bodies of water that are the reservoirs across this very arid landscape. And they are reservoirs, right, are a way of holding on to water until we need it in a fairly dry place. And that aridity and dryness remains as we kind of increase in elevation. So come up from Boulder, up toward Nederland, and then up toward, still following my cursor, the continental divide. So as we see this kind of change in coloring of the map to more alpine terrain and vegetation and snow, we see some white here in the landscape. And so we arrive to the mountains, which are actually our largest reservoir, snow in the mountains. So most of the precipitation here in Colorado falls as snow, about 80%. But unlike rain, snow remains in the mountains until it melts. So the mountains hold on to that snow up high, much like a water tower. And that's a very naturally occurring property of snow, but it's very unique in that snow dictates when we downstream see the water to use it. So again, 80% of Boulder counties and up toward Nederland, most 80% of that water comes from snow. It's held up in the mountains just past Nederland. And that is our water supply. So this supply, we're sitting here now kind of in the heart of the winter months. The water supply comes and kind of arrives in these winter months, which is a time when water demand, which is us downstream, is relatively low. And so it isn't until the snowmelt season around springtime into early summertime that this water supply actually becomes available to us, right? So it's delivered into the mountains up high, held, and then we don't actually see it and use it until later in the year, which is coincidentally or not when water demand increases. So most notably and naturally, spring and summertime is when plants begin to grow and we see leaves on the trees and flowers start blooming and the grass is green. Agriculture use and growth also increases around this time. And then sometimes small but significant human use, so also increases, right? Folks turn their sprinklers on. Others are washing their cars. Production that uses water resources often increases then. So this concept of mountains as a water tower, holding water as snow, it's an extremely important one here in Netherlands and Boulder, but across Colorado, and the seasonality of water supply and water demand that we experience. It's important. So snow falls in the mountains, it's held up there until the water melts and flows downstream. And we rely on this cycle and this characteristic of snow water storage. So again, this afternoon, my presentation ultimately aims to share and evaluate how this unique resource, snow, is changing in our backyard, how it's disappearing from our water towers, and what that means for us. So my plan to do so is to collectively connect kind of the following pieces. First, kind of going back to the foundation of snow itself. So snow is a process, why it snows, when it snows, how it snows, and how does it change once it has fallen. Second, kind of typical and historic behavior or patterns of snow, so looking backwards. And then third, looking forwards to the future of snow and the future of snow as a water resource. So we'll start with snow as a process, why it snows, a concept of different precipitation phases. And so that first looks like, let me move forward. Okay, so I'm kind of doing a little bit of Q&A with myself, but to first kind of introduce the idea of temperature. Asking why it snows is very much related to elevation, and we have a lot of high elevation here in Colorado. And as you may know, there's an inverse relationship between elevation and temperature. So as elevation goes up, it gets colder. And so to exemplify this, I have a couple photos of myself and my partner, Nick. So this is all, these three photos were all kind of taken on the same day, where here we are at the base of a mountain, wearing t-shirt and shorts. Let's say we're at 5,000 feet, a similar elevation to Boulder. We then increase about 5,000 feet to where we're putting on more layers, right? It's getting colder. We're going up. We're probably on snow itself. And then here we are at the top of the mountain, close to another 5,000 feet up in elevation where we're bundled, it's cold. And so we felt this inverse relationship, again, between temperature and elevation. So we do need cold temperatures for it to snow. We also need storms for it to snow, right? We need the actual moisture to arrive into that cold air. So why it snows is dependent on when it snows, because right, snow doesn't simply appear in the mountains. It needs to come from somewhere. We need clouds, we need moisture, which means we need storms, and we have a couple types of storms here in Colorado. They differ mostly by the mechanism that drives them in the direction from which they arrive. So this first type is a westerly storm. So typically moisture does come from the west. Winds blow off of the Pacific Ocean. So I've got kind of a moving figure here showing that. And So that moisture comes inland from the Pacific Ocean and it continues east. So we're sweeping across toward here we are in Colorado. And once that moisture hits the west side of the Rocky Mountains, it rises, it's forced to rise in elevation. So here on the left, we've got kind of a simple figure showing moisture, and then it's lifted once it hits the mountains. And as it rises in elevation, we know that the temperature decreases, which causes the moisture to condense and then eventually fall as snow. So that's storm system type 1. And the second type is an upslope storm, which is the second most common type of snowstorms that we experience. And this is a winter storm that occurs mostly on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains and in the plains directly east of us, if we're again talking about Nederland and Boulder. And so these winds are, let's see, I think this should come up. Yeah, these winds are caused by a pressure gradient, which causes a temperature gradient. And so the pressure gradient, I'm kind of trying to show here, is between, we'll see a low pressure point if you're looking at, this is kind of a screen you might see on the Weather Channel, compared to a high pressure system. And that gradient will bring colder temperatures down from the north and warmer moisture from the east and the south. And so then if we look back at the figure here, then on the right, warm air rises above the cold air. And then again, because it rises, it decreases in temperature with the elevation, condenses, and then snows. So these storms can produce an enormous amount of snow. Oftentimes the moisture can be coming off of the Gulf of Mexico, which is kind of cut off on this figure here. Notably, these storms are also, I learned this once coming to Colorado and living in the Boulder area, but upslope storms are often where, I don't know if anyone's experienced this, but where you often smell the scent of cow manure coming from the Greeley area because these winds and the plumes of moisture are coming from the east. So oftentimes if you step out and it looks moody outside and you get a scent of cow manure, you can say, oh, seems like an upslope storm is coming in the next, let's say 6 to 12 hours. So why it snows, when it snows. The next is kind of how it snows and perhaps kind of what type of snow you may see in the air and on the ground. So the type of snow that falls is reliant on kind of the conditions or weather that is occurring when it falls. So the snow will fall in a certain form, it'll look a certain way, or it may change on the ground, depending mostly on 3 things. So the first is atmospheric conditions. When it snows, is it relatively warm? Is it cold? Is it windy? The second is the ground conditions. Is the ground warm? Is it cold? Is it shady or is it lumpy? Is it exposed to that wind? Is it on the north side of a slope or a feature? Is it on the south side, etc.? And then the third item is the existing snowpack, if there is one. So what type of snow is already present? And so again, the snow can also change and evolve after a storm, which we'll get into. And that also depends on atmospheric, ground, and existing snowpack conditions. So the snow that falls can reflect these conditions. And I've got a couple examples of both snowfall types and then types of snow that you might see on the ground. So the first is just kind of soft and fluffy snow. I know someone mentioned loving going snowshoeing in fresh powder. So this looks like fresh powder. It's soft, it's fluffy. It often occurs when there's lots of equilibrium between the layers. So the snow and the ground temperature are often the same. The air temperature kind of through space is often similar. It's likely below freezing at all points. The next is a type of snow that occurs or kind of evolves after snowfalls. So here, these are called penitents, which are an extreme version of what we actually see here in Colorado, which are called sun cups. But I really like this photo. They usually occur, penitents and sun cups occur in higher elevation areas, where basically this is an example of preferential melting, where snow will fall, and then at high elevations, you'll usually only see these at high elevation, which so sun cups, again, we see in Colorado if you head up into the Alpine. But where the sun exposure is so intense, but there's also then kind of micro differences in the topography. So some parts of the landscape will start to melt, causing kind of these cups, and then that will become more and more kind of exacerbated as the cups start to melt. So once the cups melt, those areas are then likely to experience more melt, and so we kind of get these daggers in the snow. The next type of snow is snow, but it's also just kind of a fancy name, surface hoar, for frost or frozen dew. And so this usually forms on a snow surface during clear and calm conditions and cold conditions. Sastrugi is another type of snow that does not occur as snow is falling, but occurs after the fact. So this is a type of snow that looks like parallel waves, and it's caused, again, after snow falls by wind on the surface of a pre-existing hard layer. And Sastrugi is very apparent at higher elevations in Colorado. The Indian Peaks seem to be very prone to a lot of wind. And so often if you head up above tree line, you'll see formations like this, and that is Sastrugi. Grapple looks like soft hail or snow pellets, and grapple often occurs when super cooled water droplets freeze on falling snowflakes. So it's kind of a falling snowflake and then rain that was basically frozen kind of grabs onto the snowflake and then forms this larger droplet. Stellar dendrites are your very classic snowflake. These kind of longer arms occur from different pressure and temperature gradients. So you'll usually see stellar dendrites in kind of a heavier snowfall. And then hail is another kind of popular type of snow or frozen precipitation, which forms in clouds with intense updrafts, high liquid water content, and temperature gradients. So these are just kind of a couple of examples. We can talk about more if you're interested in some, but the main point here is, again, to kind of show that not all snow is the same, either when it falls or once it has fallen. And so it falls, again, depending on these initial conditions from the atmosphere, the ground layer, and the existing snow layer. And so taking this, my next kind of question to prompt us is looking at, okay, once snow falls, how does it change? And so I gave a couple of examples of surface level changes, the penitents or the sun cups and the sastrugi, which are they're formed from preferential melting from the sun and wind layers. But here I kind of want to get into more of the entire profile of the snowpack. So now that we've kind of answered some of these other foundational questions of snow, we're going more toward the level of the actual snow. So I have us in a snow pit right now. And a snow pit is exactly what it sounds and looks like. It is a pit into the snow. So studying snow science particularly as a graduate student, has actually meant a lot of time digging holes in the snow, which is great. And it is a pleasant pastime, but it's also an effective way to look at the different layers of the snowpack. So we actually do dig down from the surface of the snow all the way to the ground. So depending on the season, that can be 20 to 50 centimeters deep. Later in the springtime, that can be a meter or two of snow. And so doing this, we can actually see every layer of the snow that has fallen. So again, here we are in the snow pit, some example of layering that is up close, right? You can start to see kind of the stratigraphy. I have a couple of examples here from a snow pit that I dug, gosh, a couple years ago now, but these two photos on the corners are meant to show additional examples of layers where you can see some ice layers here, and then this figure here up on the upper right is a 2.5 meter snow pit that I dug with a student up on Niwot Ridge, which was super fun and took a long time. So basically, once we're in the snow pit, we can evaluate a number of different characteristics of snow. So one is, again, the layering, but just kind of what type of snow do we see throughout the snowpack? Is the snow pit, are all the layers uniform? Do we see signs of melt, etc.? So one tool that we use is, let's see. So first we can evaluate kind of generally or more qualitatively, and then using some tools can very much quantify the albedo of the snow itself. So the albedo is the reflectivity of a surface, and snow typically has a very high albedo value. So reflectivity, let's think here about in the summertime wearing either a white t-shirt outside on a hot sunny day versus a black t-shirt. Right, the white t-shirt is usually what we've learned is you're going to be cooler in the white shirt because you are reflecting more of the energy, more of the sun's energy than if you were wearing a black t-shirt, right? That's going to absorb more. So that albedo is kind of getting at that concept for all surfaces. A value of 0 to 1 is appropriate. High values indicate high reflectivity. So clean, fresh snow has a higher albedo than dirty, dusty, or melting snow. And so we can kind of see actually here, this is a great snow pit for looking at dust layers, and you can see some of those dust layers here compared to the new, very white snow on top. Albedo can also be affected, not just kind of this larger scale, we can kind of zoom into the specific snow grains themselves. And to do that, we're going to use this tool that is kind of crammed into the side of the snow pack and the snow pit, which is called a crystal card. If we were in person up at Wild Bear right now, I could pass around a crystal card and some snow, and we could kind of get an image like this, a real life kind of example of taking some snow grains, looking at the snow via this crystal card, which usually has a gridded background that is of different measurements. So the smaller, we can see this is, I'm not quite sure, but usually in millimeters, we're measuring snow grains themselves. So an individual snow grain is quite small, but there's a range of small, right? So it can be less than a millimeter, between 2 to 4 millimeters, or sometimes greater than 6 millimeters, for example. But very generally, we classify snow grains as either facets or rounds. And so I'm going to briefly describe both of these. Let's see. Yeah, so round or facets. Facets are we can see a bit more angular. And I'm using the example of like shoving a bunch of irregular shaped Legos in a bucket, where generally we associate facets with lower snowpack stability and lower albedo, because again, you can see that these snow grains are more angular, as are the various Lego pieces. So if we imagine dumping these Legos into a bucket, the individual pieces, they don't quite line up, right? They're different sizes, and because they don't quite line up, there's a lot of space relatively between each piece. So the individual pieces, they're not bonding all that strongly unless you're very intentionally putting them together. There's room between them for solar radiation to kind of penetrate into the bucket of Legos or the pile of facets. And that means that more energy will be absorbed into the snowpack containing facets. These usually fall when there is a large gradient between air temperature, for example, and ground temperature. So notoriously in Colorado, the bottom of our snowpack is often filled with facets, which is why lower snowpack stability, again, is associated with facets. So that's facets. Rounds are associated with, on the other hand, greater snowpack stability, greater albedo. They're more round, as the name suggests, and using kind of the same Lego analogy, here I'm imagining placing a bunch of beads tossed into a bucket. They're smaller, they're similar in size, and they fall very closely to one another. So the individual beads or rounds more easily and readily bond to one another. And due to this closeness, there's far less room for solar radiation to penetrate into the bucket. And instead, that solar radiation is reflected, much like the white t-shirt or the layer of snow with a higher albedo. So rounds tend to stick around for longer and provide a stable surface. Facets typically do not stick or bond together all that well, and facets are usually a more loose and, again, less bonded snow layer. And the catch is that these snow grains can then change. So rounds can become facets and facets can become rounds once, again, they have kind of sat on the landscape and evolved through time. So depending on where these different snow grain layers sit within our snow pit profile, it can tell us, again, how the snow fell and how the snow has changed. So I've kind of pointed out a couple of different layers, again, pointing to this dust layer, but oftentimes layers of rounds can sit on top of layers of facets, and we can see that in this snow pit. And because of that, we can see differences in temperature and density, and look at that may shed light on when and where the snow is going to melt, etc. So the drivers of the change once these different layers are in the snowpack are still, and again, atmospheric, ground, and existing snowpack conditions, and then the gradients between these layers. So how different, again, is the atmospheric conditions compared to the ground conditions, for example. So if temperature gradients exist, energy within the snowpack can head toward the ground or toward the sky, back into the atmosphere, or energy from the atmosphere and the ground will head into the snowpack. So depending on which layer is warmer versus colder. So the direction of energy or heat exchange always goes from warm to cold. So if the air is warmer than the snow, then the energy will go from the air to the snow, right? So imagine that, let's see, I think I have, yeah. So an example of that is right here, we have a warm, sunny day where the ground and the atmosphere are likely warmer than the actual snowpack itself. Then increasing energy and temperature will go into the snow itself and eventually causing melt. And then similarly, I have another photo here where that is often where the snowpack itself becomes pretty slushy. It's really warm out, but you're still on snow, which can sometimes be fun and kind of weird. And the warmth or energy, again, is going from the atmosphere to the snow, causing it to melt. And the difference in temperature between all of these layers can induce change in the individual snow grains, and it can increase or decrease the rate at which the snowpack changes. So these rates are amplified or subdued depending on the type of snow grains and the layers that are already present within the snowpack. So that is, again, kind of looking at the changes in the snow and kind of summarizes snow as a process. So we looked at why it snows, when it snows, how it snows, and then how it changes. So the next part of the talk then is to take what we know about snow and kind of this zoomed in scale all the way to looking at that individual grains. Now I want to zoom back out and discuss kind of typical or historic trends of snow itself. So snow in general tends to follow a seasonal trend across the Western US. Of note, here in Colorado, we see snow typically starting to fall in October. Sometimes up at higher elevations, that can be earlier. Sometimes, depending on the snow year, it can be later. Boulder itself didn't see snow until pretty late this fall, but snow then continues to accumulate until late spring, sometimes into April and May, and then it will melt. So this slide that I have here is a very typical simplistic plot of snow over 1 year. So this usually starts in October. So I've got October here on the x-axis. The amount is very relative here. So I've left that blank, the y-axis, but we're looking at time, one standard year from October of 1 year to the next September. And the line here is showing the amount of snow in depth, but this pattern also applies to what we call snow water equivalent, or SWE, S-W-E, where snow water equivalent is actually kind of the variable of interest when we study snow and the water resources, because SWE is basically the amount of actual water that is in a snowpack. So if you were to take your regional snowpack and melt it all down, SWE is the depth of water that you actually get from that exercise. So, for example, if you took a standard 32-ounce Nalgene and you filled it all with snow, and then you set it in a warm room, your SWE would be how much water actually is left once all that snow has melted. And typically only about 1/3 of your Nalgene would have water once it all melted. So amount of snow depth and SWE annual trends look much like this, right? We see kind of a buildup of snow, and then the line starts to decrease, which is when we're losing snow or it is melting, right? So again, here is the melt trends, and this is usually when I've got a picture here of the snowmelt period, is when we downstream see then a lot of that water supply. So we're kind of coming back to the water resources component. So the snowmelt period is when runoff is high, and we're seeing water supply when there is water demand beyond tubing down Boulder Creek. And this usually happens around June and July. And again, it's a tangible example of how we rely on snowmelt. And I then have actually, I want to make sure I post this. So my next slide is using this link that if you are able, I recommend exploring it. It is the Natural Resources Conservation Service that is one source of looking at these actual, so I gave very generic examples of snow accumulation through time. If you are actually want to see these trends in real time for a given year against the long-term average or the long-term median, this website is a great resource. I have, if you click the link that I just sent you, it should give you kind of a very generalized map of Colorado. And I've clicked on the South Platte River Basin, and here we are looking at snow water equivalent in inches. For the bolded navy blue line is this year, is water year 2022, started in October, ends in September of this year. So started in October of 2021. And we can see, right, this line is incomplete because we're still in January. If you kind of tuned into when it started snowing back in the fall, right, we had a pretty dry fall. It was almost unseasonably dry, where we were basically, I'm looking here around December 1, this year snowfall was lower than recent years, but we had a couple of pretty big storms, and so now snow water equivalent is fairly high compared to past years, and the two red lines are the average and the median snow water equivalent for any given year. So, and then water years 2021, 2020, and 2019 are also on here. And I think there are ways to populate even more years if you're interested. So I think this is a great tool. You know, if folks have questions on like what does the snowpack actually look like right now and how does it compare to previous years? This plot again is it's generalizing the entire South Platte River Basin. You can go into specific sites themselves, and they're called snowtell sites, and look at the snowpack for a very particular point location, which there are a couple snowtell sites up in the Indian Peaks, which is pretty cool. So that's what this plot looks like in real life compared to my kind of cartoon of it. But this is, again, this is a pattern, an annual pattern that we rely on. So getting to kind of the third component of this talk is, okay, we've relied on these historic trends, but what about in the future? We are experiencing climate change. We are experiencing changes that are typically trending toward a warmer world. And as we noted at the beginning of this talk, snow relies on cold temperatures. And so what happens as temperatures get warmer? So we're kind of putting on our climate change lenses and asking what's going to happen with all of these the process of snow and the historic trends of snow as the world gets warmer. So so we're kind of going to talk about the bad news and then get to kind of what we can do afterward. But I have a couple of more technical figures. This one included, let me know if you have questions on it, but this figure and the next are kind of getting at the fact that the world is indeed getting warmer, particularly in the Western United States and Western North America. So here is a figure from a somewhat recent scientific publication in the snow science world covering most of the Western US, basically looking at different stations and looking at snow water equivalent trends. So through time, since the 1950s, how much, going back one more slide, right? How have these these different lines changed through time. So what we see is that, so red means a loss of snow and snow water equivalent since the 1950s, and blue is a gain in snow. So over time, are we getting more snow water equivalent or less? This map suggests that 90% of the area is losing snow water equivalent. And so, and then the 10% of the area that is blue, only 2% of the station data, so only 2% of the station data that are blue are where there was a significant relationship in loss. So generally we're overwhelmed by red, and here in the southern Rockies of Colorado, we're losing a lot of snow water equivalent. This figure here is looking at a similar area, right? We're still in the Western North America. This is actually specific to my own dissertation research, where basically of these different areas is this WTI metric. And WTI stands for the water tower index. So pretty spot on with what we're talking about today, which is a measure of how much water is stored to snow in a particular area. With a higher, where we see the dark blue, and the different areas are what are outlined in black, and the points are the different actual physical stations. So the point of this figure, however, is that these trends are also decreasing. So areas that are dark blue are getting less blue also from the 1950s onward. So the snow water storage capability of this area is decreasing. So I have a couple of kind of flashy headlines here, which are very generally, I'm kind of skipping through it, intended to show what the technical figures showed, that basically the amount of snow in depth or snow water equivalent is decreasing. So we've got decreasing snow depth and SWE over a number of years. Some studies go back 100 years. We also see a decrease in snow fraction. So less precipitation is falling as snow. So so in some cases, right, we could see a decrease in snow because simply less snow is falling and total annual precipitation is less. However, we could also see a decrease in snow because annual precipitation is the same, but less is falling as snow. So some kind of tangible comparisons here, and kind of almost getting at a couple nuances to these trends. These are two snapshots of Arapahoe Basin ski and snowboard area, so A Basin, where this was taken, these two photos were taken toward the end of May in 2018 and 2019, right? So we can see some significant differences kind of zooming out from the same years. This is an overview look of very generally the Southern Rockies, so most of Colorado, or excuse me, the Front Range, where again, we're seeing significantly less snow between these 2 years and in 2018 compared to 2019. So there are very obvious differences. So kind of very generally, however, climate change doesn't necessarily work on these like very small timescales. So comparing 1 year to another, there is very natural interannual variability or just differences in snow between 2 years. And I'll get to a couple of reasons why. But on average, through time, climate change is making cold events like Leslie or less likely, excuse me, but it's also increasing the frequency of extreme precipitation. So the result is that certain areas and seasons are actually getting more blizzard weather, and then in other areas and seasons, blizzards are becoming, or snowstorms are becoming less common. So again, on average, the cold bringing and snow bringing events are decreasing, but when they occur, they are occurring often with increased intensity. So there are a couple of points in there. One is kind of how climate change is acting very generally. And then the other point, a bit more related to these two figures in the previous slide, are that 2 years, particularly right next to each other, don't necessarily show climate change on that small of a scale. But they might, but because we're seeing like often extremes, that can be a sign of climate change. So a couple of reasons why we might see such differences between two adjacent years include the polar vortex, which you might have heard of, is basically, to get us oriented, the polar vortex, here on the left, I'm showing it's something that is always present at the poles. And we down here in the United States, we don't always experience the polar vortex until the jet stream, which you might have heard of, which is a strong kind of wind force at higher latitudes, until the jet stream, again, a consistent global wind pattern, until that destabilizes or weakens and the polar blasts intrude more south. So now I'm looking at the right side of this figure. So these are the instances when we experience the polar vortex, when we might get very cold, kind of maybe a week long of very cold temperatures, when we might get a crazy kind of line of snowstorms because we see on the other end cold air moving south, but warm air moving north, again, because we have those temperature and those pressure gradients. And so the destabilization of the jet stream mixes frigid air from the north with warm air from the south, and kind of generally, it seems like a global example of an upslope storm, for example. But so the polar vortex is what we're experiencing with climate change, is that the jet stream itself is becoming unstable more frequently. So again, the polar vortex always exists, but we are starting to experience it more frequently because of the jet stream destabilization, which is often influenced by those increases in temperature associated with greater global warming and climate change. Another kind of nuance to climate change and warming in general is another term you may be familiar with called El Nino, which is a naturally occurring cycle where every 7-ish years, winds and pressure gradients across the Pacific Ocean weaken and affect the globe in different ways. In Colorado, that often means warmer and wetter conditions, which tend to increase snowfall throughout the year. And so again, that usually occurs every 7-ish years. And a note on El Nino that I think is relevant to us now is that following an El Nino year is usually a La Nina year, which I feel like I've been talking a lot about this year because we are in a La Nina year. And so what often happens with a La Nina year is, so in Colorado, I said in an El Nino year, things are warm and wet. La Nina is usually then the opposite and a bit more extreme. So it might be colder and drier. And in our scenario, it seems like the La Nina fall, at least, was quite dry. But I think it's interesting to kind of overlap these different kind of global phenomena, including the polar vortex, including La Nina, which occurred before climate change was really on our radar. But now we've got kind of this human influenced warming, and so taking note of what can be attributed to different changing forces, I think, is important and interesting, and certainly doesn't negate climate change, but they almost compound one another in terms of what we're seeing, particularly with the snowpack. So all of that said, I'll pause real quick. There was a question. Okay, so the 7-year solar cycle. That's a good question. I am not entirely sure. I'm familiar with, so the question is, how did the 7-year solar cycles fit into all of this? And I'm not quite sure there in terms of when solar radiation is perhaps more intense. But that is, I'm not sure. The next question was, when was the last El Nino year? 2020. And I think, Mike, you are right. It was either this past year or the year prior. I think it might have been 2020, and I think that might have been reflected in kind of a wetter year for us, which just meant more snow. Yeah, great questions. So with all of this said, my next kind of prompting question is, okay, what does this mean for our water resources, right? 80% of our water comes from snow, and now we're seeing these changes in the amount of snow and the timing of snow. So more flashy headlines here, kind of all summarizing the fact that we are losing water. So the amount of stream flow in terms of depth is decreasing. We are sometimes seeing seasonal increases in stream flow because snow is melting earlier in the year, but that means that we're seeing overall less water throughout the year, and that big snow melt pulse that we were seeing in the SWE and the snow depth graphs is decreasing in magnitude. So some reasons for the total loss is that precipitation more is being evaporated into a warmer atmosphere than was previously going downstream. More of that precipitation is seeping into the groundwater, which might be a little bit more kind of starved of water than previously. And again, with less snow, it's predicted that the seasonality of snow and the snowmelt will decrease. We'll see a decrease in that snowmelt pulse. And importantly, we had previously talked about how water supply and water demand were actually quite aligned historically, but these changes in snow mean that we're going to see less alignment between when water supply comes downstream and when our water demand is high. So earlier snowmelt means that water may come downstream earlier when crops are not growing yet and when we're still not perhaps using as much water, but then our kind of late summer and fall months become quite dry. So this next figure, again, a bit more technical, it's the use of a water tower index comparing kind of supply and demand, including social demand, natural demand, and like political demand. And so I'm not going to get into the details of this figure, but here what we're kind of looking at is areas that heavily rely on the water supply and water demand relationship, and these areas are also then, not coincidentally, the most vulnerable and susceptible to sensitivities in the changes in snow. On a more kind of through a natural lens, these changes in snow and thus stream flow and water availability affect the flora and the fauna. So, right, the flora have a particular growing season. They have begun to bud earlier in the year, which is not necessarily a good thing because their environments then become scarce, water scarce later in the year, which causes them to struggle and die sooner. And so in some instances, the actual growing season and when we're seeing particular flora, that window is actually shorter than historically. Fauna, so different types of animals, right? They need water for themselves or the vegetation that they're eating and living off of, or the animals that they're eating and living off of. I think, so pika are very studied, particularly in this area of the world, because they are very sensitive to changes in temperature. So they have begun to disappear from parts of the Rockies due to drought conditions and increases in temperature. So they are literally being moved from their habitat. Then kind of on a more recreational use, changes in snow and water affect the ski season, affect when and where you can recreate. So I use the ski season because I love skiing, but we are seeing less snow and more rain and different types of snow, right? Because as we noted, snow falls at different times and in different ways, depending on those initial conditions. So we should expect to see less snow, more dramatic storm events. Since the 1980s, this is a fairly up-to-date statistic, based on opening and closing days across Colorado ski resorts, the snow season has shrunk by, on average, 34 days, which is a big deal for folks who recreate, but also the industry itself, without getting too much in the weeds there. But so powder days, both inbounds and out of bounds, are perhaps bigger, but they are less consistent. Snow is becoming more dense and wet. Financially, again, kind of getting lightly into the economy. Snow sports tourism contributes to about $20 billion to the US economy each year. So fewer ski days means that this value decreases, which obviously sets off kind of a cascading effect there. So to compensate often, which is kind of the point I want to get to, ski resorts are making up for kind of these lost ideal conditions for snow by most notably kind of making their own snow. I know where I grew up, actually in Wisconsin, most of the small resorts there kind of rarely get natural snow at this point, from a couple decades ago, and are now, it's mostly human-made snow. So here I've got kind of a louder video of snowmaking machines, which are in use and have been in use forever, but are kind of the rate at which they're being used and the frequency is certainly increased. But I think, interestingly and of note, human-made snow creates snow with a moisture content that is much heavier than naturally occurring snow, and it uses a lot of water and energy and money. So it's literally a different type of snow, and it's expensive. And so an example, this is not intended to throw Eldora Mountain Resort under any sort of bus. I was just up there yesterday, but they make a lot of snow, and they have their own reservoir, Peterson Lake, which if you've been up to Eldora, you have driven right past it. It's the local reservoir, used for as a resource for fire, but also their snowmaking machines. And So you can imagine how much energy and money it takes just logistically to get all of this water spread across the ski resort itself. And I have this figure down here because of note, again, snowmaking requires like snow needs to fall onto something to create. And that naturally occurs as very small particles in when snow is falling during a storm, for example. But oftentimes kind of gray water or just untreated sediment is what is used for snowmaking efforts, where basically snow needs a nucleus. It needs to attach to something to fall onto the slopes. And so that kind of looks like spreading this gray water or small bacteria as nuclei across a landscape. And so that introduces foreign substances into the snowpack, which melt out and eventually flow into our waterways. So they do change and often contaminate the profile of the mountain itself. So that's kind of one rabbit hole of how the ski industry and kind of will change and has changed already. And I'll come back to questions in a second, but kind of leaning on this and the question of, okay, well, so what's happening with our water resources? And all these different facets on how our world is changing, particularly as it pertains to snow. So I've got a couple of examples that are a bit more local, and then I want to kind of get into kind of individual efforts. But so to summarize, looking at climate change, we are losing snow. So in turn, we are losing water, and we are, kind of changing or making flora and fauna and the societal world downstream more vulnerable to this changing world. And using the snowmaking example, we are overcompensating in some ways. So a couple of notable efforts for how we can save our snowpack, because it is more important than I think a lot of people give credit to. I've got Protect Our Winters up here, which is a leading climate advocacy group for the winter sports community. That's kind of their avenue of getting to building a movement against climate change. So they're very politically involved and promote climate change education for the public. And very personally, they make kind of a daily call to do your part to move toward a healthier, more sustainable environment. And they have a lot of resources to do so, which I'll get to in a second. I also point out A-Basin again as an example that we used previously, but so they have partnered with POW on several occasions, but also have a very in-house effort to, again, promote education as a first step in change against climate change, and a number of projects to reduce their impact on the matter, which I think is a great way for them to kind of serve as an example. So that is including reducing carbon emissions, the way that they are printing their trail maps, the way that they are snowmaking, and goals on making snowmaking 100% solar powered, which is kind of one step in the right direction. So those are two kind of larger efforts. I then have a slide here for, I think sometimes climate change can be very overwhelming, and a small individual acts can feel very small against, we're talking about the entire globe here, right? So I have not listed here, but kind of in my own notes, some examples of ways that you can fight climate change at home. I would love folks to share ways that that they kind of day by day or week by week or month by month kind of look at climate change and things that you may consider in your daily life. So, for example, kind of some perhaps popular examples, right, is that reconsidering transportation, right, is one way to kind of reduce your carbon footprint, which contributes greatly to climate change. I know we didn't get into the mechanisms of climate change, which wasn't quite the point, but reducing your carbon footprint is one step you can take, and doing so via transportation, right? So instead of cars or air travel, what can you consider? Is that walking to the grocery store more often, using your bike, public transit, carpooling, etc., which, I think in some ways can seem inconvenient, but through time can really accumulate to a lot saved there. So I've got transportation, electricity, right? So moving away from fossil fuels and using more clean energy. Does this look like adding solar panels? Does this look like using LED lighting, or a programmable thermostat, for example? So kind of, again, smaller things that add up through time. Water consumption, right? So washing your clothes in cold water versus hot water, which saves on a lot of electricity. Not drinking bottled water. Food choices. Someone mentioned composting, right? So, and then evaluating the types of food that you're eating and where they're coming from, which I know can spark a debate there, but is something to consider. Eliminating food waste, recycling, then kind of home goods, right? So furniture or clothing, and upcycling these materials instead of buying new, clothing in the summertime, drying them outside instead of in your dryer. Lawn care is something else I had noted. So those are kind of examples that I think of kind of in my daily life. But I'm excited to hear more folks. We have a rain barrel suggestion. I don't know much about rain barrels, particularly in terms of any legalities that might need to be considered there, which is interesting. But feel free to drop more ideas in the chat. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the last point before I just want to summarize where we went today. So the process of snow, kind of the history, and then the future of snow, and very generally what snow means as a resource, very much beyond kind of this backyard playground, which is also a very important component of snow. And then kind of thinking about small to larger stepping stones on what we can do to preserve our beloved snowpack in the climate, for ourselves and for others, both kind of personally and naturally speaking. So that is all that I have today. I want to say thank you again. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday afternoon with me, and I will take any questions. Thanks again. Awesome. I know I had missed one question. On how the ski industry responded with appeals toward Congress to mitigate climate change. And I think that, again, kind of like I'm taking mental notes on the 11-year solar cycle. I think those questions are a bit out of my wheelhouse, and I don't even feel confident to spitball thoughts there. But thank you for the questions, and I'm happy to follow up once I kind of do my homework on those. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Hi again, everyone. Michelle here. Awesome presentation. I learned a ton. I hope you all did as well. We'll stick around a few more minutes if anyone has anything, final thoughts to add, those sorts of things, whether it's about how to be a little more sustainable in our lives or questions about Kate's incredible presentation while we got her brain online here. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us for our Climate Action Sunday with Kate. We'll be doing another one next month with the Boulder Watershed Collective. They're going to be talking about forest health and fire mitigation and their project up in Gold Hill. And I believe Kate is even one of their board members. So lots of friends in the region around here. And we'll be doing a snowshoe hike next week. I'll be guiding that on Saturday. So anyone who wants to actually go out in the Rocky Mountain snowpack and learn a little bit about mountain ecology, I'd love to hike with all of you. And then yes, Mike is putting in the chat that Joe Nagoose is very accessible and leading the way in Boulder County. He's a great person to reach out to if you want to talk to a local representative. And I was trying to look up the solar cycle thing real quick. The question was asked to see if I could put a link, and I got a lot of different stuff. So I think Kate and I can do a little more research for you, John, and hopefully get back to that too. And yeah, I'm curious about, ski industry working with Congress as well. I don't know that much about that particular question either, but those are really good thoughts. I think, springboard from them. Ooh, keep it clean partnership. Okay, thanks, Bonnie. I love all these inputs and ideas and ways to get involved locally. POW is another great organization. Mike linked a video there. Front Range Pica Project, if you want to get involved with the pica research and what's happening with them. Yeah. All right, we'll stay on for maybe one more minute and take some questions, but otherwise, thank you all so much for joining Kate and myself and Wild Bear for our Climate Action Sunday. Yes, NRDC does really great work. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for your participation in that. I know it's kind of a funky format where we can't really see or hear you, but I know we'll save this chat, and I really appreciate, to reiterate, Michelle, and yeah, just being engaged.
Yeah, and Kate, up to you. I'll put you on the spot here. Feel free to say no. But if you want, you can put your email in the chat, and maybe folks can reach out if they have other thoughts or questions and those sorts of things. That way they can get in touch with you if they have other ideas or questions they'd like to chat with you about.